It's kind of amazing when you stop and think about how much our internal settings shape everything. Not just personality, but the real basics how your mind is set.
Right. How you face a challenge, process info, even how you think about what you're capable of.
Exactly. It's like we're all wearing these unique mental glasses, these lenses.
Absolutely. And that set of lenses, that basic way you frame things, that's what we're calling a mindset. It's this really ingrained collection of assumptions, your beliefs, the expectations you carry around about yourself, other people, life situations.
It's not just a mood then. It's deeper.
Much deeper. It's the framework you use to interpret pretty much everything.
And what's really striking, digging into the material for this deep dive, is that these lenses, they aren't permanent. You're not stuck with them.
That's a key point. Our sources, again and again, emphasize this. Mindsets are highly changeable. They're not fixed filters.
Which is huge, right? Because understanding what these different mindsets are, that's got to be the first step. The first step to maybe tweaking those lenses, finding ones that help you more.
Precisely. And that's really our goal here in this deep dive. It's put together just for you. We've pulled together quite a stack of sources, research papers, stuff on psychology, education policy, even tech angles.
Yeah, all giving these different puzzle pieces about how our minds work, how they frame things.
So we're going to unpack some of the big ones you hear about. That core fixed versus growth mindset idea, obviously, but also the difference between thinking narrowly and broadly, which is crucial. And even how thinking in concrete versus abstract ways affects your big life decisions.
We'll look at where they might come from, what the research says about their effects, and yeah, most importantly, practical ways you can actually cultivate the mindsets that work for you. As a learner, as someone making choices, just navigating life.
Think of it as a shortcut to getting really informed on these powerful ideas.
Like getting a peek at your own mental operating system.
Exactly.
Okay, so let's start there. Based on sources like the Stanford report, Verywell Mind. How do we pin down what mindset really means in this context?
Well, boiling it down from those sources, it's essentially that unique lens. It's built from these deep assumptions and expectations you hold about your own skills, your life, how things tend to play out. It's more than just attitude, it's pervasive. It colors how you see, interpret, and react.
And the sources are pretty clear. This isn't just, navel gazing. It has real consequences.
Oh, absolutely. That's a critical finding across the board. The research strongly suggests mindsets play a major role in life outcomes, how you frame your potential, how you frame situations. It seriously affects if you take on challenges, how you bounce back from setbacks, and ultimately what you achieve.
And this is the crucial bit we mentioned, they can change.
Yes, that's the really empowering news right at the start. Highly changeable, not fixed parts of who you are.
That's massive. It means you're not just stuck with a way of thinking that might be holding you back.
You have agency, and just knowing that, just understanding that potential for change, that's step one in taking control of your own mental landscape.
Okay, so when people talk mindsets, the absolute starting point has to be Carol Dweck's work, right? Fixed versus growth. It's in several sources, the education paper, Verywell Mind.
Right, that's the concept that really pushed this whole discussion into the mainstream. It's fundamental for understanding how we view our own abilities.
Let's break down the fixed mindset first. What's the core idea there?
So with a fixed mindset, the core belief, according to the Ed Policy paper in Verywell Mind, is that your basic qualities, like intelligence or talent, are innate, they're static, fixed traits you're born with.
You either have it or you don't.
Pretty much. You've got a certain amount of smarts or musical talent or whatever, and that's your lot. It's seen as unchangeable.
Okay, so if you believe that your abilities are just set, how does that affect how you approach, say, a tough challenge or making a mistake?
Well, think about it. If your ability is fixed, then any situation that tests that ability becomes kind of threatening.
Because it might expose your limit?
Exactly. A challenge isn't seen as a chance to learn. It's more like a performance where you might reveal you don't have enough of that fixed talent. The education paper notes that people with a fixed mindset often avoid challenges. Their main goal becomes preserving the appearance of ability to themselves and others.
And mistakes.
Mistakes are bad news. They're not useful feedback. The Stanford report mentions they're often seen as proof of inherent flaws. Evidence that you just don't have what it takes, and that can really knock your confidence for future attempts. There's a big concern with how smart or talented other people think you are.
Yeah, that makes total sense. If I think I'm just not a math person, then a hard math problem feels like proof, and failing it confirms my belief. safer to just avoid it.
That's a classic example. The Stanford report gives another. If you struggle socially at a party and you think social skills are fixed, you might conclude you're just bad with people.
Which then makes you anxious about the next party.
And maybe avoid it altogether, which means you never practice or develop those skills, reinforcing the original fixed belief. It becomes a cycle.
Okay, so that's fixed. You're stuck with the hand you were dealt. What about the growth mindset?
Growth mindset is the polar opposite. The core belief here, again from the Ed Policy paper and Verywell Mind, is that intelligence and abilities are malleable. They aren't fixed. They can be actively developed, strengthened.
Good.
Through things like dedicated effort, hard work, practice, using good strategies, getting good teaching or coaching, and being open to feedback from others. It's about the process of development.
So challenges and mistakes look completely different through that lens.
Totally. With a growth mindset, effort isn't a sign you lack talent. Effort is the path to getting better. Challenges aren't threats. They're opportunities to stretch yourself, to learn something new.
And mistakes aren't failures.
They're feedback, valuable data points. They show you where you might need to change your strategy, put in more focused effort, maybe get some help. They're just part of the learning journey. Expected, even.
Where do these basic beliefs come from? Do we just pop out with one or the other?
Well, the sources, especially Verywell Mind and the education paper, really point to the huge impact of early experiences, particularly the kind of praise and feedback we get as kids.
Ah, right. This is the difference between praising the person and praising the process.
Exactly. Very well. Mine lays it out really clearly. Person praise focuses on the trait. Stuff like, you're so smart, or you're such a natural.
Sounds positive.
It sounds positive, but it can subtly imply that the smartness or talent is just this fixed thing you are. So later, if you struggle with something, you might think, oh, maybe I'm not actually smart after all, which reinforces a fixed view.
Ah, I see. It links success or failure to your core identity.
Right. Whereas process praise focuses on the actions taken, praising things like effort. Wow, you really worked hard on that. Persistence. You didn't give up even when it got tough. That strategy. That was a clever way you approached that problem. Learning from mistakes. Okay, that didn't work, but what did you figure out from trying?
So you're praising the doing, not the being.
Precisely. You're reinforcing the idea that abilities grow through effort and strategy. That directly feeds a growth mindset. And there's good research backing this up.
You mentioned that longitudinal study.
Yes, both Verywell Mind and the Ed paper mention that Gunderson study from 2013. They tracked kids and found that the ones who got more process praise from their parents actually showed stronger growth mindset beliefs years later, like 4 to 6 years down the line.
Wow. So that early messaging really sticks.
It seems to have a lasting impact on how kids frame their own abilities.
And it's not just parents, surely. Teachers, the whole school environment.
Oh, definitely. The education paper stresses that teachers and parents are huge models. The messages kids pick up, explicitly or implicitly, about intelligence and ability from them and the environment really shape things. The paper even mentions how harmful stereotypes like outdated ideas about who's good at math can sadly influence a student's belief about their own potential in that area.
It sounds like it's not usually black and white, though. People aren't purely fixed or purely growth all the time.
That's a really important nuance the education policy paper brings up. It's actually rare for someone to be 100% fixed or 100% growth about everything. Most of us are somewhere on a spectrum, and your mindset might even shift depending on the situation or the specific skill. You might have a growth mindset about learning a new language, but a fixed one about, say, public speaking.
Okay, now here's where the sources get really interesting and add some surprising complexity. While growth mindset feels intuitively like it should lead to better outcomes, the research on academic achievement isn't always straightforward.
That's right. This is where we need to go beyond the simple definition. The education policy paper cites some big meta-analyses studies that pool results from lots of other studies, thinkers like Burnett, Sisk, and these big reviews have actually found overall a pretty weak relationship between having a growth mindset and academic achievement scores.
Weak? Really? That's
Yeah.
That's surprising. Why would that be? It seems like it should help.
It suggests the picture is more complicated. Other factors seem to play a big role. For instance, that Ed policy paper mentions a 2020 study by Wang and colleagues looking at adolescents in China. They found that growth mindset did predict achievement, but only for the kids who also had high levels of what they called self-affirming beliefs.
Self-affirming beliefs. What does that mean here? Like general confidence?
Yeah, based on the context, it likely means a generally positive view of oneself, a belief in your own worth and capability beyond just academics. a sort of foundational self-esteem or self-efficacy.
So the study suggests that just believing your intelligence can grow might not be enough if you don't also have a basic positive belief in yourself overall.
That seems to be the finding. For kids with low self-affirming beliefs, maybe struggling with self-worth, the growth mindset alone didn't translate into higher scores. It seems like the positive effect of growth mindset might need, or at least interact strongly with, that baseline positive self-regard.
So it's not just I can learn, but also I am capable and I'm worthy.
That seems to be one important piece of the puzzle. The education paper also points to cultural differences. It mentions studies in places like China, Turkey, Norway, Spain, North Macedonia, where they also found weak, or sometimes even negative, links between growth mindset and academic performance in those specific contexts.
So how growth mindset plays out isn't universal.
It seems influenced by the broader cultural or educational environment, maybe how effort is viewed, how failure is treated culturally. Those things might change how a growth mindset actually translates into results like test scores.
And even the mindset of the teachers or principals doesn't always show a direct link to student scores.
That's another finding mentioned in the paper, referencing studies by Chaucer and Wagner. They found only a weak connection between the growth mindset beliefs reported by school leaders or teachers and the overall student achievement scores in their schools.
So it's probably good for educators to have a growth mindset, but it doesn't automatically lift all boats.
Right. It suggests that just believing it isn't enough. How it's implemented, the actual teaching practices that embody those principles, maybe other school factors, those are likely crucial mediators. It's not magic dust.
Okay, this adds really important texture. So the takeaway isn't that growth mindset is useless, but maybe its direct impact on something like grades is complicated. Depends on other things, your self-beliefs, the culture. But regardless of grades, shifting to a growth mindset still changes your whole relationship with effort and challenges.
Yeah.
That seems valuable in itself.
Absolutely. It's maybe less about predicting a specific score and more about shaping your fundamental approach to learning, your resilience, your willingness to stick with difficulty. Understanding these nuances helps you see it's about fostering the whole picture of belief in yourself, supportive environments, not just the malleability piece in isolation.
Okay, let's shift gears a bit. Beyond fixed versus growth, there's this other dimension, broad versus narrow thinking. This is about can you grow, but how widely you cast your mental net, right?
Exactly. How much information, how many different perspectives do you actually let in and consider?
And one source, O3 Zone, makes the point that narrow-mindedness isn't just, the really extreme stuff like fundamentalism.
No, it's much more common, more subtle. It creeps into everyday judgments. We do it based on our own internal models, maybe rigid rules we've picked up, or just leaning too hard on first impressions. It's a way we simplify things, often without realizing it.
What's driving that tendency to narrow things down?
The O3 Zone source suggests a big driver is often fear. Fear of being wrong, fear of the unknown, fear of change. Let's face it, the world is complex. Really grappling with that takes effort. It can feel overwhelming. So the source argues it's often just more comfortable psychologically to stick with simple, maybe even trivial beliefs because they feel certain. They keep us in our comfort zone.
That source also connected narrowness to the Dunning-Kruger effect.
Yeah, it mentions Dunning-Kruger is often seen in narrow-minded folks. That's the bias, where people who aren't very skilled in an area tend to overestimate how skilled they are. If you're thinking narrowly, filtering out stuff that contradicts you, you're probably less likely to even see the gaps in your own understanding. Makes you ripe for overestimating your competence.
There's also that tunnel vision metaphor that comes up.
Wikipedia uses that really effectively. Tunnel vision is described as this set of mental shortcuts and logical errors that basically lead you to focus only on information that fits your existing opinion or theory.
And you ignore everything else.
You actively filter out or dismiss stuff that's inconsistent, like looking through a narrow tube. Anything outside that view just doesn't register or gets explained away.
How's that different from confirmation bias? They sound really similar.
Good question. The Wikipedia source draws a distinction. Confirmation bias is more about selectively seeking out external information that supports your view, finding articles or people who agree with you. Tunnel vision is more about over-relying on your internal information, your initial theory, your assumptions, while ignoring correct external info that contradicts it.
So confirmation bias is about bias searching. Tunnel vision is about bias processing of what you encounter.
That's a good way to put it. One is about input, the other about filtering that input against an internal model.
And the source points out this can have really serious consequences, especially in fields like law enforcement.
Definitely. Wikipedia talks about the dangers in the criminal justice system. If investigators lock onto a suspect early on, tunnel vision can make them unconsciously focus only on evidence that points towards guilt, while downplaying or completely missing evidence that points to innocence. It's been implicated in wrongful convictions.
Okay, now for something really unexpected from the research. One study from CiteSeerX found that exerting self-control can actually make you think more narrowly. That feels backward.
It does seem counterintuitive, doesn't it? You'd think self-control, more careful, maybe broader thinking. But the CiteSeerX research presents this fascinating finding. The act of using willpower seems to trigger a narrower way of processing information.
How did they show that? What did the studies look like?
They ran several experiments. In a key one, study one, they had people do tasks known to deplete self-control, like resisting tempting cookies or trying not to show emotion while watching a sad film. Standard stuff in psychology.
Okay, draining the willpower battery.
Right. Then, afterwards, they did a visual task where words flash either right in the middle of the screen or off to the side in the periphery.
And the people who'd use self-control.
They were worse at noticing or recognizing the words in the periphery compared to a control group who hadn't done the self-control task. But, interestingly, they were actually a bit better at recognizing the words right in the center.
Wow. So using willpower literally narrowed their field of attention, like putting on blinders.
That's the implication from that study. It suggests self-control shifted attention, concentrating resources narrowly on what was right in front, possibly at the expense of processing things on the edges.
And there were other studies in that paper, too.
Yes, the CiteSeerX paper details others that backed this up. Study 2 found that after exerting self-control, people used narrower categories. They were less flexible in grouping things together. Study 3 found they used more concrete language, focusing on specific details rather than the bigger picture, which also fits with a narrow, detail-oriented style. The pattern was consistent. Using self-control seemed to push people towards a narrower, more concrete focus.
Okay, so the idea is maybe that narrow focus helps you succeed at the self-control task itself.
Possibly, yeah. By zeroing in, you might be better able to resist that immediate temptation or stay on that difficult task.
Right.
But in this, the crucial potential downside, the paper raises this self-control-induced narrowness might mean you perform worse on other things happening around the same time that need a broader view, or flexible thinking, or noticing something unexpected.
That's a really interesting thought. Like if you're white-knuckling it through a stressful deadline, maybe you're less likely to have that aha moment about a different problem because your focus is just too tight.
That's exactly the kind of trade-off this research suggests might be happening. The CiteSeerX paper also connects this broad, narrow idea to other concepts in psychology.
Like,
They mention things like high-level versus low-level ways of thinking about actions, like, am I typing keys, low-level concrete, or writing a report, high-level abstract. Also, high versus low-level controls, which is the abstract concrete thinking we'll get to next, and broad versus narrow bracketing in decision-making. Do you look at each choice alone or consider all the downstream effects? These all tap into that same underlying dimension of mental scope.
but didn't that paper also mention research showing the opposite link? That abstract thinking helps self-control.
It did, which highlights just how complex this is. While their studies found exerting self-control leads to narrowness, they cite other work, like from Fujita and Trope, showing that getting people to think more abstractly, which is related to broadness, can actually boost their self-control.
So it might go both ways.
It could be bidirectional, yeah, or context-dependent. Maybe narrow focus helps in the moment of self-control, but cultivating a generally broader, more abstract perspective builds your underlying self-control capacity over time. It's definitely complex.
So, if narrow thinking triggered by fear, maybe even by effortful self-control can be limiting, then the goal is cultivate broad-mindedness.
Generally, yes. Broad-mindedness means being open to that complexity, not automatically filtering out things that don't fit, being willing to genuinely consider different angles. And the Forbes source on critical thinking really ties this together.
How does it connect to critical thinking?
The Forbes piece argues that real critical thinking isn't just about logic or analysis skills. It fundamentally requires an open mindset. To properly evaluate information, spot biases, including your own, and make sound judgments, you have to be willing to entertain different viewpoints and question your own assumptions. That willingness is broad-mindedness.
So being open is a prerequisite for thinking critically.
That's the argument. The source suggests things like engaging in intellectual conversations, especially with people who see things differently, and continuous learning are key ways to build both critical thinking and that essential open, broad mindset.
Okay, let's shift focus again to another way our minds work that really impacts decisions. Abstract versus concrete thinking. The decision-making study explored this one.
Right. This looks at the level of detail in our thinking. Are we focused on the specifics or the big picture?
So what does a concrete mindset look like?
Concrete thinking, according to that study, is specific, detailed, context-bound. When you're thinking concretely, you're focused on the how. The specific steps, the immediate mechanics, the tangible aspects of something. The study induced this by having people think about specific examples, like listing types of dogs as examples of pets.
Okay, the nitty-gritty and abstract.
Abstract is the opposite.
Yeah.
General, context-independent. Thinking about the essence, the bigger meaning. Abstract ideas themselves, like freedom or justice, don't have a specific physical form, as the study notes. When you're thinking abstractly, you focus on the why, the purpose, the higher level goals. They induce this by having people think about categories, like figuring out that a car is an example of the abstract category vehicle.
And this links to construal level theory, psychological distance.
Exactly. The decision-making study is built on construal level theory, or CLT. The core idea from Trope and Lieberman is that how psychologically distant something feels affects how abstractly or concretely we think about it.
Distant how? Like far away.
It can be distance in time, far future versus now, space, far away versus here, social distance, someone unlike you versus you, or even hypothetical distance, unlikely versus likely. More distance generally leads to more abstract thinking, focusing on the core features, the why. Less distance leads to more concrete thinking, focusing on the details, the how.
Okay, so how do these mindsets, abstract versus concrete, actually affect the choices we make? Especially choices involving time or risk.
That's what the decision-making study tested directly. After getting people into either a concrete or abstract mindset, they had them make two kinds of choices. Intertemporal choices, the classic smaller reward now versus larger reward later.
Like the marshmallow test, basically.
Sort of, yeah, that kind of trade-off. And also risky decisions, choosing between a sure, smaller payoff versus gambling for a larger but uncertain one.
And what did they find? How did mindset influence these choices?
The results, shown in their graphs too, were pretty clear. People put into a concrete mindset tended to make decisions that were more immediate and safe. They were more likely to take the smaller amount of money now rather than wait, and more likely to choose the sure thing over the risky gamble.
So focusing on the here and now details makes you favor the here and now and the certain.
That seems to be the pattern. Makes intuitive sense, right? If you're focused on the concrete how, the immediate feasibility, the present, feels more real.
And the abstract mindset group?
They showed the opposite pattern. They tended to make decisions that were more future-oriented. They were more willing to wait for that larger, later reward. And interestingly, they were also more willing to choose the riskier option, the gamble, for the bigger potential payoff.
Okay, future-oriented makes sense if you're thinking abstractly about the why or the bigger goals. But why riskier? That feels less obvious.
And this is where the study dropped a really crucial qualifier, that finding abstract mindset leading to more risk-taking wasn't true for everyone. It only held for the participants who also scored high on future self-liking.
Future self-liking, like how much you like the person you expect to become. We touched on future self-continuity earlier. Very related. It's about feeling connected to and positive about your future self. They measured this with things like questionnaires, including a visual task where you rate how much your current self overlaps with your future self. High overlap, positive feelings, high future self-liking or continuity.
Okay, wait. So, thinking abstractly lets you consider future possibilities.
Yeah.
But you only take risks for that future if you actually like and feel connected to the future you who would benefit. That's exactly the implication, strongly supported by their data. Abstract thinking opens the door to considering those uncertain future outcomes, the bigger why. But whether you actually embrace risk or delay gratification now depends on how much you value that future self. If you feel disconnected from or negative about who you'll be, even thinking abstractly about future gains won't motivate you to take a present risk or make a present sacrifice.
Wow, that connects cognitive style directly to your relationship with your future self. It's not just how you think, but who you're thinking for.
It really does. It links how you process information to your long-term identity and motivation. The study also noted that while the mechanisms for undervaluing future rewards, temporal discounting, and uncertain rewards, probability discounting, might be different in the brain, both types of choices seem to be influenced by this interaction between mindset, abstract, concrete, and future self-continuity.
That's incredibly rich. Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here. Mindsets as lenses. Fixed versus growth affecting potential. Narrow versus broad affecting information processing and fear. Abstract versus concrete influencing future decisions. Linked to future self. And it feels like they overlap, right?
Definitely. Fixed thinking can lead to narrow thinking about possibilities. Self-control inducing narrowness might push you towards concrete details. Abstract thinking is inherently future-oriented. They're different facets of that overall mental framing.
But the big takeaway, the really hopeful one from the sources, is that these frames aren't permanent. You can change them.
That's the crucial message. Empowerment through awareness and changeability.
How do we actually do that, though? Change these deep patterns? The sources mentioned consciously deciding to believe change is possible.
Yes, that's the starting point, intellectually accepting malleability. But beyond that, sources like the Stanford Report and Verywell Mind point towards techniques, often borrowed from cognitive therapy. Things designed to help you spot and challenge the distorted thoughts or self-limiting beliefs that often prop up fixed or narrow mindsets.
So becoming aware of those automatic negative thoughts, I can't do this, this will never work, and actively questioning them.
Exactly. Asking yourself, is that really true? What's the evidence? What's another way to look at this? The Stanford Report even suggests specific resources like books on cognitive techniques or potentially working with a therapist who specializes in cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT, for structured help.
Let's make this super practical. How can you, the listener, actively work on cultivating these helpful mindsets? Let's start with growth mindset again.
Okay, practical steps from the education paper are good for anyone, not just teachers or parents. First, set high expectations for yourself, but crucially, also figure out the support you need to meet them. It signals belief in potential.
Don't just aim high, resource yourself for the climb.
Exactly. And model it. Be open about your own learning struggles and how you overcome them. Talk about mistakes not as failures, but as learning points. What did you learn from that attempt? How will you try differently next time?
And the praise thing, apply it to yourself too.
Absolutely. Catch yourself achieving something. Instead of just thinking, I'm good at this, person praise, focus on the process. Wow, I really persisted through that tough part. Or that strategy I tried actually worked. Acknowledge the effort, the strategy, the learning.
And embracing challenges.
Lean into them. See them as chances to learn, not tests to pass or fail. Reframe mistakes as data. The education source also mentions specific programs out there like Brainology and how some educational systems like the IB try to bake growth mindset principles right into how they teach.
But what about cultivating curiosity? That BBC source called it a neglected trait.
Yeah, curiosity is powerful. The BBC piece highlighted benefits like deeper learning, more creativity, connecting ideas, even more job satisfaction and innovation.
How does it work? Why do we get curious?
The Psychology of Curiosity source says it's basically driven by a need to close an information gap, reduce uncertainty. We get curious when we realize there's something we don't know but want to.
Like the examples you mentioned with kids.
Exactly. Kids playing more with a confusing toy to figure out the rule, or designing little experiments to see how a music box works. They're actively trying to resolve uncertainty. The BBC mentioned Houdini vanishing an elephant, creating a massive mystery to hook people's curiosity.
So how do we nurture that in ourselves?
One suggestion from the BBC source, particularly relevant maybe for managers but also for ourselves, is increasing autonomy and choice, even small ones. Feeling like you have some control seems to fuel exploration. For yourself, it means actively seeking out things you don't understand. Lean into the uncertainty rather than rushing for an easy answer. Explore the edges of your knowledge.
And cultivating broadness or open-mindedness, especially since narrowness seems so easy to slip into.
The O3 Zone source says, confront the root. Acknowledge the fear of being wrong, fear of complexity. Actively resist that pull towards overly simple answers just because they feel comfortable. Try to consciously embrace complexity.
And the critical thinking connection.
Vital. The Forbes source emphasizes that critical thinking demands an open mindset. So practice it actively. Use logic, analyze, but also consciously seek out different perspectives, especially ones you disagree with. Challenge your own assumptions. Why do I believe this? Could I be wrong? Engaging in respectful debate, continuous learning, these build that muscle.
So bringing this all back to you, the listener, Understanding these different mental settings, fixed growth, narrow, broad, abstract, concrete, gives you this incredible lens on your own thinking. And actively working on them, fostering growth, openness, curiosity, understanding your decision drivers, can genuinely change how you learn, solve problems, make choices, and just handle the world.
It helps you become more flexible, more resilient, more effective in your thinking.
Now, just before we wrap up our look at these human mindsets, the source has offered one last interesting point of comparison from the world of tech: narrow AI.
Right, the University of Wolverhampton source covered this. It's not a mindset we have, but a type of artificial intelligence defined by its built-in, designed narrowness.
How's it different from what we think of as general human intelligence?
Narrow AI systems are built for specific tasks. They operate within very defined limits. They might be amazing at, say, playing chess or recognizing faces or translating text, but they can't do things outside that narrow domain. They lack general common sense, adaptability, broad understanding.
But they're useful because of that focus.
Exactly. That's where their advantage lies, according to the source. They boost efficiency by automating tasks. They can process massive data sets for insights humans could never find. They power things like Siri or Alexa, and they're making huge contributions in areas like medical diagnosis from images.
So specialization is its strength, but limitations too.
Definitely. The main one is that limited scope, useless outside its lane. It lacks empathy, nuance, common sense. A big issue the source raises is dependence on training data. If the data is biased, the AI's output will be biased. That's a huge ethical concern. Plus, the risk of relying too much on them for decisions without enough human oversight.
Any other challenges mentioned?
The source listed things like privacy issues, the difficulty of understanding why an AI made a certain decision, the black box problem, concerns about job displacement as automation increases, and cybersecurity vulnerabilities. We should just note these as challenges the source identifies without taking a stance.
It's a really interesting contrast, isn't it? Human narrow-mindedness often comes from fear and holds us back. AI narrowness is a design feature that enables specific kinds of power. Thinking about the efficiency of a narrow tool versus the pitfalls of our own cognitive narrowness, maybe that offers a final thought on the value and limits of focus.
It really highlights the unique potential of the human mind, its flexibility, especially when we consciously cultivate breadth and a growth orientation.
So we've taken quite a journey today through these different mental sets, from fixed versus growth beliefs shaped early on and their complex link to outcomes, to the spectrum of narrow and broad thinking, driven by fear, but maybe also by effort, to the abstract versus concrete lens impacting our view of the future, tied to how we feel about our future selves.
And the thread running through it all is changeability. These are powerful lenses, yes, but they aren't fused to your eyes. You can understand them, you can work with them, you can adjust them.
Which really is empowering. You listening right now have the ability to become aware of your own mindsets and actively cultivate the ones that help you learn, create, bounce back, and make choices that align with who you want to be. Fostering growth, openness, curiosity. It really can help you become that adaptable, informed learner.
It's an ongoing journey of awareness and intentional development.
So to leave you with a final thought to chew on, pulled straight from those surprising connections in the research. We heard that exerting self-control can sometimes induce a narrow mindset. Maybe reflect on this. Are there tasks or situations in your day-to-day life that demand a lot of willpower? Could those moments be subtly narrowing your focus without you realizing it? And could just noticing that connection be the first step toward consciously broadening your view again when it really